Welcome to Behind the Transaction from RGCF. In this episode, we'll be discussing business disposals and in particular, the sale of contractor management services company Orange Genie. Joining me in the studio is Nick Johnson, CF partner, and on the line we have Graham Fisher, who was the principal shareholder and CEO of Orange Genie before its sale. Gentlemen, hello.
Hello.
Graham, for context, tell us about Orange Genie and the story behind the business.
I acquired the business about 15 years ago. It was in a sorry state, so I spent considerable time rebuilding it, recruiting new staff in, automating systems and so on. And the basis of the company is we look after and manage contractors who go out on permanent assignments. It's very much a volume business, so automating information is critical to us. And over the years, we've grown from having about, I think when I took it over, we had about 600 contractors. When we got to sell the company, we had about 8,500 contractors on our books. Considerable size. We had a good reputation in the market, and just very, very pleased with what we did.
So what was the reason that you decided to sell and why did you engage RGCF to help you?
There were two principal reasons. One is, as you can all see, I'm an old man now. So I turned 70 and I thought it was about time to retire. But the real factor was, unfortunately, my wife became ill. And I have to spend time with her. So it got to a point where the decision was actually pretty much made for me.
So, and why did you choose RGCF? Did you have an existing relationship or was it a reputation thing? Or?
Literally, as probably with all these things, I started with a Google search to find some names of companies that could provide us with the support we needed to sell the company. And I came up, I think, with 4 names. I spoke to a few contacts who knew of the companies, and we eventually spoke to 3 of them. And I think the reality is that the chemistry worked a lot better with Rycroft, Nick and his team than it did with anyone else. They got a pretty good reference from 2 people that we knew. And so it was sort of the end of the process was selecting Rycroft to take us forward.
Good endorsement there, Nick.
Indeed. Thanks,
that was
Graham.
good. So let's tap into some of your expertise then. So when a business is being sold in the manner that Graham sort of just described, what are the key areas that the shareholders should consider, and obviously their advisors as well?
Yeah. So I think there are 2 key steps for shareholders and their advisors to consider together. I think the first step is the sort of big picture and the feasibility assessment. So rather than rushing into a process, taking time to properly assess what the shareholders are trying to achieve, what are their objectives. Every situation is different and should be judged on its own merits. But shareholder objectives can embrace value, timing, whether or not they want to be involved or not, as the case may be. And also it's important to recognise that different shareholders can have different objectives. So it's not a one size fits all. It might be that some shareholders want to exit in full, some want to realise some value but participate in future value creation, and it's trying to find the right answer that suits all of the shareholders. And then I think once you're clear on the shareholder objectives, it's then making an assessment of how do they fit in the context of the real world, i.e. what's happening within the business and the market. So from a business point of view, are there things that need to happen to make it more attractive to buyers, to improve value? Do we assess the value of the business to be in line with the shareholders' expectations, or do things need to happen? And if they do, what and how long are they going to take? And from a market point of view, is it a hot market with lots of buyer activity, with lots of growth potential, or is it a flat market with a degree of uncertainty and regulatory pressure? Clearly, different situations will give you different views in terms of timing. So I think in an ideal world, the stars align. Shareholder objectives, business and market, but that's not always the case. And sometimes, you might need to delay for market timing to come into play. or sometimes you might want to accelerate because the market is great and you know the opportunity is now. You can get tomorrow's price today. So that's the first step, and then the second step is the implementation. Once you've decided that the time is right to sell, it's how do we implement most effectively. And for me, there are three key building blocks. The first one is planning and preparation, and that embraces a whole host of things like presenting the business in the most effective way, addressing things that might need to be addressed, like management gaps or tidying up corporate structure. Also, it embraces effectively researching the potential buyers. You know, who has the most to gain strategically from buying this asset? You know, who are the right people to speak to within those organisations? How do we present the strategic opportunity in the most effective way to them? And the final area in planning preparation is preparing for the due diligence. You know, being prepared for that detailed due diligence exercise that a buyer will do is really important and gives a buyer a lot of confidence when it's done properly. So the second area beyond planning and preparation is buyer interaction. So, you know, how do we interact with the buyer in the most effective way at the most effective level? Relationship building with the buyers is so important. There are so many bumps in the road, even on a smooth sale process. If you've got a good relationship with the buyer, you've got a great chance of overcoming those bumps. And that's one thing that Graham did tremendously well on the sale of Orange Genie. He developed a great relationship with the buyer. And the third area is designing and running an efficient process, and that process might be a full auction process, or it might be, you know, a more focused process on a small number of strategic buyers. But whichever process you decide to run, attention to detail is really important. There's so much value that can be gained and lost within a process. So having really intense attention to detail is really important.
So Graham, just coming back to you, how did you find the disposal process? You know, was it purely a financial transaction, or was there any emotion linked to it based on, you know, how far you'd taken the business?
Yeah, no, the reality is because of my position with my wife, I didn't really have a choice. So I'm going to say it was closer for me to being a financial transaction. I needed to get a deal done. I've got to say, I just endorse everything Nick's just said. It was a very difficult market. Obviously, COVID was either just beginning or raging as we were going through this process. And we got quite a way down with one of our buyers, and then they inevitably, I'm going to say, pulled out. And, you know, that was difficult for us to accept. We put a lot of work into it. So having Nick's support through that was actually was very important to us. You know, we got through that, all of the research on who the likely buyers were and so on, how to present the company. We could not have done that on our own without Nick's support. So he pretty much, you know, shepherded us across the line.
Brilliant. Nick, we've got about 60 seconds.
Okay.
So in 60 seconds, what advice would you give to anyone selling their business?
Well, over and above what we've already talked about, I think probably if I'm going to pick out one thing, it's probably about the relationship building and back to what Graham did tremendously well on the Orange Genie deal. Building a really strong relationship with the buyer really helps you to overcome some really difficult challenges. And I think that's probably the main thing that I would leave us with.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Graham, thank you very much. Thanks for your time today. And please look out for more behind the transaction videos coming soon from RGCF.